Hello everybody, welcome back. I'm glad to see you, and honestly I'm glad to see myself too, seeing as it hasn't been several months since my last upload. But it has been a couple weeks, so you know, room for improvement. Anyway, I had some thoughts on the Melee rework, and yeah, I know I'm a little late to the party, but you know, I just wanted to voice them. Specifically, I've got a couple of suggestions and just a little bit of feedback. And honestly, I'm gonna spoil my opinion a little bit here. I'm very pleased with how it looks so far. But before we get too far into the subjective stuff, let's first lay out the facts and just go over what DE has said they are planning on doing, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. So I'm just going to quickly list off all the changes, and if any clarification is needed, I'll do that afterwards. Alright, first and foremost, all of the melee weapons in the game are going to be rebalanced in a similar fashion to the previous weapon passes. Channeling as we know it is going to be removed. The bonus damage from your built-up combo counter is now only going to benefit charge attacks, and charge attacks will also consume the built-up combo that you have. And to compensate for those two things, there will be a significant base damage boost across the board, and they did mention it would be somewhere around 200 to 300%. The now freed up channeling button is going to be repurposed into a dedicated charge attack button. The combos in all of the different stances in the game are going to be kind of normalized so that each combo accomplishes essentially the same thing without each stance being exactly the same as all the others. They said they're going to add in a lot of animation canceling, allowing you to just flow through combos easier and get in and out of combat easier. There's going to be a bigger focus on charge attacks and blocking. Some of the old channeling specific mod effects are going to be reworked somehow into blocking effects. And they're going to add across the board the ability to dual wield one-handed melee weapons with one-handed secondary weapons. And towards the end of the last dev stream, they did show off a sort of experimental early concept for a new channeling state that they did specify would not use energy as a resource. And that's about it. If there's anything I missed, I apologize. I tried to be pretty thorough, but it's definitely possible. So what do I think? Well, like I said earlier, I am happy with what they showed so far. I am not really worried about the rework or removal of channeling. I don't really care. Never really used it. The base damage increase sounds awesome. Very excited for that, because that just means you'll be able to start off doing way more damage. And if it is around 300% increase, that's going to be great, because that's essentially having a 3 times combo multiplier, which is 135 successful hits. And it won't go away if you wait just a little bit too long. No one really has any idea how they're going to be reworking the channeling mods and effects into blocking, and the big question on everybody's mind really is, how is Lifestrike going to be affected? And we won't know until they release a dev workshop on it, or talk about it in the next dev stream. The stance normalization is going to be great, because that basically just means that once you learn how a stance works, you can use any stance in the game. And they're not going to make it so that every stance is effectively the same thing. Basically what they're doing is they're making it so that different combos are executed the same way and have the same style of combat. For example, all stances will now have a base combo if you are not moving. They will have a different one for if you are moving, and if you start while holding the blocking button, you will do a sort of gap closer, which changes based on the stance. I'm excited for this because that just means that more stances will get used more often, because they will be more about personality and what the person wants to use, and less about which one has the best procs and the best multi-hits and whatnot. And while I did say I like a lot of these changes, and I'm really excited, because I am, I definitely don't think it's perfect, and I do have a couple suggestions that I think might work well and could improve it just that little bit more. And some of these suggestions will be made less with the idea of, you know, getting it into the game or whatever, but more just for fun. Anyway, let's start with the obvious one that I've seen all over the place many times. Basically, there are 2 button inputs that are not being used currently. The one I always see suggested is the reload button, which just simply isn't touched. The other one, which I actually have yet to see suggested, as far as I know, is the Alt-Fire button. I think the implementation of a use for the reload button would be a little bit more straightforward, so I'll start with that. Honestly, it could be one of many things. I mean, the most obvious would be if they're trying to keep channeling in some form, it could be, the button for that, or it could just be the new button for charge attacks, however they want to make that work. Something else I thought might be cool is, if you've noticed, if you do a charge attack in the current game, while you have a whip sword that is just in quick melee, you will do a regular charge attack, but if you do it when it's fully equipped, it'll be sort of a whip grab. And I think it would be neat if you could do both. And it would be cool if the reload button kind of became that, sort of a secondary function button for things like the whip swords and glaives, and even if you want to get fancy, things like split swords. So everybody thinks the dark split sword is really cool, and it is pretty cool, but it would be that much cooler if you could swap the stance you were using and the type of weapon it is mid-combat. Now I think adding mechanics for the Alt-Fire button would be similar, but a little bit more interesting. The 2 weapons I think of first when I would consider adding Alt-Fire mechanics to melee weapons would be the Zenistar and the Sigma Noctantis. With the Zenistar and the new emphasis on charge attacks, it's going to be pretty obnoxious to be, doing regular combat and be constantly throwing out and calling back your fire disc when you might just want it to be out or want it to not be out. Especially because it actually changes from pure elemental to IPS damage, whether or not the disc is in or out. And the Sigma Octantis I don't think would be a problem the way it currently is, but it could be neat to just be able to throw it whenever you want and not have to be in the air doing an air attack. And like I said before, with the dark split sword, the same thing could be accomplished with the Alt-Fire button as with the reload button. And if you started adding Alt-Fire mechanics, you could really just go crazy and add them to all kinds of different melee weapons. Because honestly, at least for me, in the game currently, there's not really a reason to have any melee weapon that isn't just whatever's the best in its category. Unless, of course, you just really like one or like the way it looks or whatever. Having Alt-Fire mechanics would give you near limitless potential to just make every weapon unique in their own way. Next, I'm going to suggest something that's a little big. It's likely a little bit too much work to ever really become a reality, but if it did happen, it would breathe a lot of new life into some weapons that are really quite boring. There are a total of 17 dual swords in the game. 14 if you don't count Prime or Prisma variants, and 13 if you don't count the dark split sword, which some might not. Any way you put it, that's a lot. That's a lot of dual swords. The next closest is single swords with 14, and one of those is a variant, and another one is completely unobtainable to anyone who isn't a founder. And the worst part about this all is that they all basically play exactly the same. So how would I fix this? I would do so by separating dual swords into 3 weapon types, 2 of them being new. Dual swords, dual axes, and sword and dagger. If you did it this way, it would leave you with 3 true dual swords, 6 different dual axes, 8 if you count variants, and 5 different sword and dagger weapons, with a 6th if you count variants. And if I remember correctly, between TennoCon and the past few dev streams, they've actually shown 2 new dual swords that would be added to the game. But if we separated them out and gave them all their own animations, we wouldn't have to worry about this problem of having all these weapons that are useless because they're all basically exactly the same. So those are the big boys out of the way. The next couple suggestions are pretty small compared to those, and a lot more self-explanatory. In the last dev stream, they were showing that there are now heavy versions of slam attacks where you can actually aim it and kind of, travel through the air instead of just straight down. And I think this same principle could be easily applied to the other maneuvers you can do with melee weapons, like heavy and light slide attacks or heavy and light wall attacks. Whatever they can do, they might as well. And they really didn't talk at all about the new channeling state or what it's going to do, but it could be cool if, in the same vein as my alt-fire and reload button suggestions, if the different effects were unique to the different weapons that you could use it on. For example, having the dual heat swords add a bunch of fire AoE on every swing instead of just, more damage or something like that. Another thing I'm hopeful for, because they actually mentioned that the sound team hadn't done a pass on the melee weapons yet, but I really hope that they go through basically all of the melee weapons and give them unique sounds. Because, yeah, the primary and secondary reworks for weapons were great, but honestly, the thing I noticed the most was the sound upgrades. And I would love it if we could get the same treatment for melee weapons, because almost all of them, specifically the long swords, they all sound basically exactly the same. I remember years ago when I first got the Skoliak being surprised that it sounded different. So before I end, I'm going to talk really quick about something that is extremely important. If you haven't noticed, I've been very positive towards all of this, which I am. It looks great. I mean, honestly, I was having a little bit of a hard time sitting completely still when I was watching it in the dev stream. But looks and feel aside, they haven't said anything about the most important aspect of this whole rework. They haven't talked at all about any of the stats or any of the mods. They haven't said anything about all the nitty-gritty little details that we need to know. And until they do that, we really won't know whether or not this rework is going to be any good. Because if there's anything I've learned from the years of playing this game, it doesn't matter how cool something is, if it's not useful, it's not going to get used. Like, Arcwing. Or the fact that dogs and cats still don't have vacuum. Or Lunaro. I mean, that's pretty cool, but there's no reason to do it, so why would you? So yes, I'm really excited. But at the same time, I'm also pretty worried, because it could just be total trash. But regardless, we won't know till we know. So that's where I'm going to leave it. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Take what you will from them, but this is just me putting it out there. So I hope you enjoyed watching. Please come back again next time, and please, if you have any feedback at all, please, keep it constructive, but I would love to hear it. And I know last time I said I was going to be doing a video on Boobin, but that tiny rework they did a little while ago, it threw a bit of a wrench in my ideas, and so I had to update them a little bit. And that'll be coming soon, but not quite yet. And that about wraps it up. So, see you next time. I know this video is supposed to be over, but I'm going to make one more quick cut in just to clarify two things. Most of this video was recorded in between dev streams 114 and 115. Luckily, they didn't really show anything new with Melee in dev stream 115, so most of this video is still relevant. But all those times when I'm talking about the last dev stream, I am talking about dev stream 114 and not the actual most recent dev stream. And besides that, I realize how kind of confusing this video might be. I do sort of jump around a lot, but I was really trying to fit a lot of things into one video. It also ended up being about 4 minutes longer than I wanted it to be. In the end, most of my suggestions end up being, hey, please give us more variety, it'd be cool. But if you feel I didn't explain something well enough, or you'd like it to be perhaps in its own video and its own topic, I would gladly do that. Just let me know. But now for reals, see you next time.